inviting me and thanks for being here. If you've seen the abstract that I had submitted, I'm basically going to talk about citizen science as a sort of a movement that has taken shape in the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years though. And the idea is, I think, fairly old, that we have various scientific activities that go all the way from natural history to more modern biological sciences or any other kind of sciences. And as human beings, we are always thinking about our environment, and by environment I don't mean the natural environment, all sorts of environments that we grow in, that in which we function. And we organize our thoughts. We like to theorize a little bit about how the world around us is, social to political to environmental. So I think naturally we are built up to be that kind of specialized thinkers compared to most other organisms as far as we know. So, and the whole science enterprise has sprung from that desire to be curious, to know about our environment and to perhaps use it to our benefit, but also generally to understand things. Everybody knows we don't particularly get anything out of watching butterflies in terms of physical or otherwise what you would call tangential benefits, but clearly all of us like to do that. So from that, so that's the background. Basically, we all like to be biologists or scientists at some level. Even a tribal guy all the way to more modern people like us, we all do that. Can we actually use that to take us all to a different place, perhaps a better place, has been a big question. And the whole citizen science movement in the last 5 to 10 years especially has built up on that philosophy. And there are many projects. You might have heard of eBird, which is probably the most successful citizen science project, mainly because of the sheer amount of data it has generated on birds, global data sets. They have several million records, perhaps tens of millions records by now. So that's the power of a good citizen science project. And of course, most other citizen science projects are somewhere between initiation and achieving something. The project that I'm going to talk about is Butterflies of India, but we'll get to that a little in 5 minutes perhaps. When I started, unlike most other scientists you will meet nowadays, I did not start out as a scientist to be a scientist. I was a naturalist long time ago. Ever since I was a kid, I've been observing birds and butterflies and snakes and all sorts of things. And as I was going through college, I was looking around what to do. There was no particular trajectory for me, no career path that I knew of. And I was looking around, I realized that if I become a scientist, a biologist, I will actually get paid to do what I really want to do, which would just chase butterflies all my life, which is what I'm doing now. So from that passion, I got into science, but I continue to do butterfly natural history. I continue to chase butterflies even for work that might not lead directly to the scientific work that I do, but I still do that because I like it. So I have this broad background from natural history to all sorts of biological sciences, and about 7 years ago, to end of 2009, I had a meeting with several people in India, several of my friends at that time, and we decided to launch a website. Before that, there were lots of, this has gone through several phases. In 2001, 2002, something like that, a friend of mine, Vijay Barve, started Yahoo group. So yahoo.com started this whole facility of groups. And there was a butterfly group. There was a lot of information being exchanged, but there was no compilation, there was no long-term presentation of all that information. So I thought we would have a meeting, discuss how we could organize this. That happened in November of 2009, and then in early 2000 we launched the website. And this is actually how it looked. The framework of this website, the looks of this website really haven't changed. since 2010, although a lot more information has been added and many new features have been added. So we launched this, and through this we have created a fairly strong community, a fairly serious community of people who do a lot of work. We all enjoy butterflies, but we also contribute a lot to growth of sciences and conservation biology through the information that we are gathering. I'll talk about some of that. So the entire talk today is basically from this 7 years of experience of doing what we call citizen science, which is doing science and creating scientific data sets with help of citizens, or few people, and in many ways myself as well. A lot of the work that we do here is not the scientific work that I do in the lab and I present in my institute or at scientific meetings, but this is leading to a lot of interesting science that I do and many other people do. So that entire experience is based on that, and we'll now slowly go over this. Before I go further though, I want to know quickly about this particular group. How many of you are maybe perhaps associated with science and or universities and or teaching? Is there anybody? Oh, half of you. Okay, great. And the rest half, what do? Do you have jobs in regular companies?
Retirees.
Okay.
Hobbies.
Hobbies? Okay. How about younger guys? Are you just out of college, university, in university? What are you doing nowadays?
I'm a professional, but kind of interested in this.
Okay, alright. And those who are associated with science or colleges, were you teaching, were you a scientist, what was the thing? I know about you, you were a PhD student. How about the rest?
Research associate,
Okay. Doing what?
bioinformatics.
Okay, alright. And there were two more hands, I think? No, okay. You?
I'm doing consultancy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright. Fine. So I know the crowd, so I can speak accordingly. Alright. There are two things that I want to do. First, tell you a little bit about Indian butterfly diversity and talk generally about Indian butterfly, and then I'll talk specifically about this particular citizen science project, the website Butterflies of India. So we'll try to do both. And I don't know the normal format of these talks, but I would also like it to be much more interactive rather than me just unloading stuff I know on TV. So we will try to do that. So feel free to stop me at any point, and you can ask questions, pass comments, whatever works for this group, whatever makes this meeting interesting. Okay, so before we talk about the website itself and all the stuff that you will see there, I'll point out something quick, which is that you're here somewhere in Singapore, and then we have a very large country, but compared to, let's say, Malaysia, which is fairly small here, and then a little bit in Borneo, even if the size of the country is quite large, the geography of India makes it the distribution of diversity highly concentrated in certain areas. So if you have seen biodiversity hotspot maps, there are four biodiversity hotspots, 3 areas where biodiversity is concentrated. One thing you have, actually it's from this map, I know where I can. We'll pick up something that is very sparsely populated here on the map. Great. So you've got rid of all the spots there. So you see this is elevation, so anything that looks like that is a mountain. You see there is one mountain chain across the west, along the western coast of India. And those are the Western Ghats. That's one of the most prominent, perhaps the second best known mountain chain in India, next to the Himalayas. and that's very close to Sri Lanka, and together with Sri Lanka, Western Ghats are considered one of the globally recognized biodiversity hotspots. And it's particularly important for things like amphibians, freshwater fish, dragonflies and damselflies because of high endemism. In a lot of these organisms, amphibians, I think endemism is something like 80 or 90%. Extremely high endemism and fairly good species diversity too. So that's the first biodiversity hotspot. Then most of the central area is fairly dry, and of course there are butterflies, some spectacular butterfly phenomena such as migrations or regular annual migrations as well as more chaotic migrations caused by monsoon and other things. But most of this area is dry, not too many species, maybe 150 together in central India outside the Western Ghats. And then when you hit northern India, of course we have the great mountain chain of Himalayas, which goes a little bit into Afghanistan and of course quite a bit in Pakistan and a lot more in India, Nepal, Bhutan, into southern China as well as northern Myanmar. And that is the most prominent feature perhaps in the entire Indian subcontinent in terms of mountainous systems. As you know, this has caused massive climatic changes in the Indian subcontinent when the plate of India collided with the Asian plate that created the Himalayas, also the Tibetan plateau, and it has created this entire extremely cold landscape because of the altitudinal and latitudinal changes here. So as you hit the lower Himalayas from the plains of India, as you start climbing, the mountains start getting definitely wooded, definitely much more forested. Initially they remain fairly warm, but then they start cooling off. And as you go higher up, of course it gets colder and colder. And we have three zones in the Himalayas somewhat. You have the foothills, which are much lower mountains. They are also created differently from the rest of the higher Himalayas. Then you have the middle Himalayas and of course the Trans-Himalayas. And then there are outer and inner ranges. I won't go into the geography of that very much, but Himalaya is not just a simple mountain chain. It is a fairly complicated structure by now through several millions of years through which this is developed. And most of the biodiversity that you see here is also a little bit structured. So the Western Himalayas, so everything from Western Nepal all the way to Afghanistan and further up. Most of the fauna, butterfly fauna that you see there has come from or is influenced by temperate fauna. So you see a lot of butterfly species groups which are much more diverse, much more prominent in Europe, for example, or Northern Asia. So everything from Tibet to Mongolia to Russia and Northern China, of course. So a lot of species, most of the species in fact, at very high elevations and a lot of mid elevations in the Western Himalaya have been derived from a lot of these temperate elements. You have things like clouded yellows, you have gonepteryxes, what is gonepteryx? I don't remember the English name right now. But there is a butterfly genus called gonepteryx, which is again from this temperate area. And clouded yellows, there are no clouded yellows anywhere close to Singapore, but that's another quite well-known group. And of course you have Apollo butterflies, which you probably know. These are swallowtail butterflies, even if they don't have tails. So that's again fairly diverse group in those parts. As you go further and further east, at the same altitudes, areas get quite wooded, quite green, and also much warmer. 6,000 feet in the Western Himalaya is much colder and much drier compared to 6,000 feet in Arunachal Pradesh, for example, which is this corner state. It starts from the end of Bhutan here, all the way to southern China and Myanmar here. So it shares boundary with Tibet on this side and with Myanmar on this side. So it's an entire very long and narrow state. one of the most biodiverse states in India, and then you have Northeast India. So earlier Himalaya and Northeast India were, or rather East and West Himalaya were considered separate. Now the entire Himalaya are considered one biodiversity hotspot. So I talked about this as our first biodiversity hotspot. This is the second one here. And then Northeast India and Andaman Islands, these are Andaman Islands. So Andaman and Nicobar, they come almost close to Sumatra, just a little bit north west of Sumatra. So all of this is in India, and Andaman and Northeast India are part of the Indo-Burma hotspot. So this great blue line you see there, or rather the great big river that it represents, starts in Tibet, runs along the border, north of the border, enters India, and then flows through the plains into the drains into the Bay of Bengal. Seriously, one of the biggest, one of the most impressive rivers in the world. Certainly the most impressive in the Indian subcontinent. And this is called Brahmaputra in India. And north and east of Brahmaputra, the climate is very different. Some of the forest elements are quite different, and south and east of that it's quite different. So it acts as a major barrier. So Himalaya are basically delineated as things that are west and north of Brahmaputra river in India, and then east and south of that, southward is this Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. And then you have Nicobars, which is part of the Malayan, what is it called? Do you remember the name of that biodiversity hotspot? Okay, I showed it in the slides that I presented earlier. So you have that as, so even if this, we usually call this Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Andaman part of it and the Nicobar part of it belong to different biodiversity hotspot. And if you go to Nicobars, you will see a lot of butterflies that are familiar to you deeper down in Southeast Asia. Whereas you will not see that kind of butterflies in Andamans and in Northeast India and West India. So one biodiversity hotspot here, second here, third here, and fourth here. So Nicobar is basically just the northern and westernmost tip of the Malayan biodiversity hotspot here. Northeast India also just the extreme north and western tip of the Indo-Burmese biodiversity hotspot here. Whereas Himalaya are more or less in India, and then Western Ghats part of Western Ghats, Sri Lanka is in India. So this is the biogeographic setting that we have. As I mentioned, in Western Himalaya, most of the butterflies have come from temperate areas. Everything that occurs in these areas as well as in the Western Ghats has come mostly from these areas. And that would be something like perhaps a few millions of years ago, all the way to perhaps 20-30 billion years ago. So most of the butterfly fauna that you see in India is relatively recent and relatively fresh. In most cases, almost all butterflies that occur in India will either be very diverse, much more diverse in European and Northern Asian regions, or they'll be very diverse in this Indo-Chinese to Southeast Asian region. And only a few groups have reached India. But interestingly, because India is at the border of all these major what we call zoogeographic hotspots or regions, India is a pretty large mix. So the generic diversity of butterflies is very high. Even if we may have just one or two species in many genera, we have a lot of those genera represented in India. So at a higher taxonomic level, it's an extremely enriched fauna. Even if at species level we have a little bit less than what you would expect. So the reason I point out Singapore and then Malaysia earlier is that even if the area is much smaller here, the butterfly diversity you see in this region is almost as comparable to the entire fauna of India than you would imagine. So that's a sort of contrast that we have.
I see the the eastern coast of
Mhm.
India is not a biodiversity hotspot. What makes the Eastern Ghats less favorable to butterflies?
So Eastern Ghats is not a unified thing. Western Ghats is one mountain chain which was created because of a certain geological feature. So the western parts, the land from Western Ghats basically slid down in the ocean, which is why the slopes on that side is much steeper compared to the eastern side, which had a lot of lava flows. So you don't even, in many cases, feel that you're climbing a lot coming from the eastern side, but from the western side, it's like this. It's very hard to climb there. Not very hard. You have to be young and with a lot of stamina to climb from that side. So that's the difference because of that feature. So the reason why Western Ghats are considered one system and because of which it has a lot of biodiversity is perhaps because of the longer history as well as a more uniform feature, being a more uniform feature. In the Eastern Ghats, even if you call them Eastern Ghats, a lot of those mountains have come about from very different processes. They are of different ages and they're not contiguous, except one major gap here south of what we call the Nilgiris. There are no major biogeographic breaks within the Western Ghats. And this gap is also lower elevation. It doesn't completely stop, it doesn't take you to sea level, but it's fairly low. And certainly on both sides you see really tall mountains. And this gap has certainly caused a break in distribution of a lot of high elevation species. But most butterflies have easily crossed this through lower elevations. Here all these mountain chains are pretty isolated. So even if you might have some diversification in some of these areas, that doesn't spread easily. That's also a much drier area, how should I put it? Because of droughts and other things, I guess that area has suffered a lot more compared to Western Ghats, which were much more protected. So every time there have been invasions from these sites, migrations from these sites, I suppose a lot of fauna and flora just died getting here, whereas a lot of butterflies probably still get blown here. Some of them establish, others don't. But once they reach here, a lot of faunal groups are fairly stable there. That may be the reason why Western Ghats are much more diverse compared to Eastern Ghats, and Eastern Ghats more or less don't have too many special things. Except recently people have been discovering that Peninsular India on the whole has given rise to a lot of lizard radiations. But it's just that one group. We don't know any other groups where Peninsular India has driven a lot of diversification. So even if you have mountains, they look pretty good. You don't have too much diversity there. Alright, so as I said, that's about biogeography, but that has a very large impact on Indian butterflies. Just like if you want to compare, in Singapore you have much smaller, much lesser diversity. If you go to any part of, let's say Thailand or Malaysia, and you choose the same areas you have for the island of Singapore, in that area you're going to have many more butterflies in Malaysia. That is because that's a contiguous area, whereas you're on an island. Not very far from the mainland, but island effects are pretty strong. Similarly, because these are islands, you have way fewer species, but almost everything there is endemic with respect to many other groups, and almost everything is endemic in Nicobar, slightly less so in Andamans. And even if Western Ghats are part of the mainland, we often call it a habitat island, because you have evergreen forest here, you have evergreen forest here, and this is part of a much more contiguous patch of evergreen forest. And then there is no habitat for evergreen forest species here, and then you have it here. So in terms of evergreen forest, this is an island, even if it's not a true oceanic island. So you have all these island effects in India. So even if the area is quite large, diversity is lower because of that, except in these parts because they are part of mainland, so diversity is great. And the same 6 families that you have in Singapore occur in India. So in terms of higher level diversity, we have the same stuff that you have. But we have some really massive radiations or great diversity of certain groups. Lethe, for example, how many Lethe occur in Singapore? Tree browns, that group.
Only one tree.
One
only.
Okay.
There's only one.
Great. In India, if you go to the Himalayas as well as other parts of Northeast, you have in that group how many? 25, 26 species, something like that. So certain groups are extremely diverse. Arapala, how many Arapala do you have?
Arapala is pretty good. We have about 30 species,
Okay.
but Malaysia has about 100.
India has I think 60 or 80 species in the entire group. So you have pretty good diversity. Apollos are also pretty diverse in India. So you have these groups which are much more enriched in the Indian region compared to let's say Singapore, but of course Malaysia is pretty awesome for the land area that they have. They're pretty awesome. And you can explore this tree on the left, the taxonomic tree, so that you will know the Indian butterfly fauna a lot more. But again, I'm not here to talk so much about butterflies per se. I think you know enough about butterflies, you hear about butterflies enough. What I'm here to talk about mostly is in this landscape, what we have been able to do and what we hope to do. As you know, India is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. There are rankings. We know the biodiversity hotspots. They have been listed somewhere. I told you about the 4 Indian biodiversity hotspots. There are also country rankings, which are the most diverse countries, and there's a list. India is one of the 17 most biodiverse countries. If you also look at Indian maps with other layers of information, you will also realize that India is also among the most populous countries in the world. Right now, the second most populous country, and in the next 10 years or so, we are going to overtake China, even if we have a much smaller area compared to China. Now, it is true that most of China is also desert and very cold places which are very sparsely populated. So even if China looks that big, the actual population of the actual density of humans in China is mostly concentrated in the south and along the eastern coast, right? So anyway, China is much larger, but we are going to overtake China in human population size. Pretty phenomenal, pretty depressing in so many ways. So right now the human population in India is 1.3
Too many
billion.
Anush around.
1.3 billion people, if you can believe that, and we are still climbing. So I don't know when we are going to start stabilizing and perhaps going down massively. So we are at the same time a very biodiverse country and also a very populous country. And as you can imagine, it has not been a highly developed country. It's still a largely poor country, even if the Indian economy is doing fairly well. If you look at the absolute money that's in India, if you look at the GDP in India, figures are pretty good. But again, divide everything by 1.3 billion people and India is still a poor country. If you look at the inequality in India, it's again fairly depressing. If you look at how much progress we need to do, it's tremendous. So as far as I can see and as far as everybody can see, we are going to keep developing and exhausting natural resources for a long time. So the big challenges are, A, how do you grow without completely destroying everything in sight? A path which a lot of countries have taken, and unfortunately I hear a lot of Malaysia and a lot of Indonesia is headed that way. They also have tremendous diversity, but they are probably going to finish off stuff way sooner, way earlier than perhaps India will. And we are all going to be in deep trouble when we hit that ceiling. So the question is, how do we develop without completely destroying everything? And also how we conserve things when people are so disconnected from all the natural areas and all the biodiversity. And probably that problem is quite evident to you. you can imagine you are sitting on a small island where you have some really good forest patches, but most of you are sort of locked into this highly dense population, highly densely populated area. So you probably noticed this, a lot of young Singaporeans don't have as much connection to nature as probably you have. And I certainly see it in India. I was much more active. I knew birds around my neighborhood, my house when I was growing up. Most Indian kids do not know even the common birds around their house anymore. They don't go out and play, they don't go out to forests for trekking. Some do, but that proportion is really small. So how do you get people interested in A, knowing about forests, and B, caring about forests? And this is where I think this sort of citizen science projects help a lot. A, they induce people to, they encourage people to go out, take pictures, contribute these records to central databases from where they get to learn a lot, and of course they can contribute to something bigger than their individual observations. So with this background, I launch into what we are doing, and then of course if you have any impressions of what we have been doing, what we could do, if you have any ideas, just let us know. Okay, so this is what we do. It's an internet-based and peer-reviewed resource devoted to Indian butterflies. The three important goals of Butterflies of India is that we want to compile all the information that's available on Indian butterflies, and then we want to disseminate this comprehensive information about biology of Indian butterflies to the general public, which is what this website does. Encourage their observation, to study their natural history and ecology, look at populations and so on, and then compile all of this in a central database. And of course the last thing is spread awareness about their conservation, and ideally also do actual conservation. Spreading awareness is one thing, and leading that to action is another thing, and I'll also tell you how we are doing that. And Indian Foundation for Butterflies is the organization which has developed it. It's an informal organization, it's not a registered society, it's not an NGO, it's just an informal group. But it's an awesome informal group. Imagine for 7 years, 8 years to stay together without fighting, without splitting, and creating all these resources, building these resources is not an easy thing. There are other groups which are fighting, but not our group, and I think our strength comes from that. So it is a massive success because of how we have stuck together and how we have developed these things. So when we say it's an organization of butterfly biologists, it's an informal gathering of butterfly biologists as well as butterfly watchers who all work together towards research and conservation of Indian butterflies. And because most of the data are contributed by ordinary citizens, non-biologists I should say, everybody is an ordinary citizen, we are ordinary citizens, but when we are talking about biology and science, we of course separate us from the rest of ordinary citizens because we earn our bread and butter doing our science, but otherwise we are ordinary citizens in that sense. So with that, we are trying to build up this data set, of course, and we would like everybody to contribute everything they have to this website and other such websites. I'll talk about some of those later. So this is the home page. On top you will see there are all these menus. Most of them are under construction because we are first developing some critical taxonomic resources as well as massive image data sets before we get to that. But you can look at what sort of things we have. The most easy way to reach all the pages right now is this BOI by the numbers. BOI is Butterflies of India. So we have number of species pages, 952 out of 13 to 1400 butterflies that we have. I should say 1300 to 1500 because we are discovering a lot of new species in India. So you can access those. These are all reverse chronological order. So this is the latest species page that we created on the 20th of last month, and the first species page was created on 4 May 2010, just shortly around around the time the website was launched. I think we launched it with 2 or 3 species pages. Nowadays, when we launch new websites, and we have recently launched it, Reptiles of India, we launched it with 100 species pages. So we've become more ambitious and more thorough with this. But this was a model, and then everybody just started contributing. So we had the meeting, our first organizational meeting on the 1st November of 2009. I know the date really well. And then shortly after that meeting, I went back to Boston, where I was situated at that time. We organized all the back-end stuff for launching the website, and in a few months we had this ready. After that, it has really exploded. We have gone through massive expansion, and if you can look through any of this, click on any one of these, and then that opens in a new window that I talk about. Before that, before we get there, I'll point it out to you. We have a number of species pages, number of life cycle pages, which is all the eggs and caterpillars and pupae for those particular species. We have 345 species for which we know all these stages. How many species occur in Singapore? Butterfly species?
Extant species 370, 336.
336. Oh, so it's like Western Ghats butterfly fauna. And how many of them have larval stages recorded?
About 30 are unknown.
Okay,
It's about 300.
about 300. Okay. So the numbers are similar, I guess, 300, 335, or 45. But if you look at which species are known for this, mostly things that occur in southern India, and mostly common species in northeast India. So we still have a long way to go, but at least we have a substantial number recorded, which is great. And I'll show you some of those pictures soon. Number of identification keys we really haven't developed much, because we need to develop many other things before that. This is a very, very interesting and important set of resources. Larval host plants. We have images of larval host plants shown pretty well, and nectar plants, of course, of all the butterflies. We have total 37,000 images on the website right now, and all of these are peer reviewed. Nothing goes on our website before I and a few other people who have been given rights to peer review before we publish. So all of that is peer reviewed before it goes online, which is why we do make mistakes like everybody else does. But if you can swear about anything, I think this is a website that you can swear about. Almost everything that you will see here has been peer reviewed pretty well. You're not going to find errors there, because it has been looked at before anything has been published. And if we find something, often we have a very strong user community, as I mentioned. So if somebody finds something, they have impressions about something, they quickly send an email to us saying, I think this should be something else, and then we can make those changes. So it's a pretty healthy community which tries to make this even more and more perfect all the time, or even more and more comprehensive and more reliable all the time. Number of website visits, we have nearly 900,000, and number of unique visitors, which should really be number of unique devices. Every time you visit this website, if you do it from a laptop and then do it from a phone, that's going to get recorded as 2 devices. So this would be some proportion of that those records. But even if you consider that, that's a lot of people who have visited this website. So it's an extremely successful website in many ways. And if you actually Google search something, what's your favorite butterfly here, which also occurs in India?
Tawny coaster.
Okay, so you can search Tawny Coaster. It's a widespread species, it's a very common species. So you have butterflies of Singapore, both are butterfly circle. You have Wikipedia, and that's our website. If you search, let's say, Acria terpsichore, there you go, Wikipedia, and then I found butterflies. So you can search for a lot of butterflies, and our website comes up first, because it's a highly linked website. It's a very well-known website, and I don't see here, but a lot of species that you can search for. Let's say Catopsilia commona. So all these images are from the Board of Tourism India website, and then of course our website comes up among the top websites there. So most of the times the reason why we have such high visitation rates is because it's a fairly comprehensive website. Alright, so that's about the homepage itself. There are lots of resources, and on the left side you can see what we call this entire taxonomic framework for Indian butterflies, which you will also see on top of species pages. You can click through any of these and then reach whatever species you want to reach. So that's one way of getting there. You can also search and it will show you some suggestions. Alright. So when you get to a species, how many of you have seen this website before? About half of you. Okay. So when you go to the website, you can see what subspecies occur in India. Their scientific and English names are given, and then you can scroll through. This is the first subspecies, the one in the Himalayas, and you can click on any of these. It will open up in a larger image. You can see the scientific and English names there. You see the specific locality here and the date, of course, the person who has taken the image, and each image has a unique media code. So in scientific writings or other places, you can code that particular media code to talk about which image you are referring to. And as you go down, there is going to be a separate subspecies. This one here. This is my picture. This is in Mananchola in Kerala, and again that's the date. You see all the details. So by comparing all these images, first you know what the upper side and underside look like, and then a lot of variation that you could capture, much more intense red, much more pale yellowish orange coloration. You can see all sorts of variation here. And I will take you to another website, another species page where you can see a lot more of that. If you click on early stages, we have some description, but the description, written textual description is missing from most species pages right now. That's another thing that we need to develop. But we have lots of images. And again, you can click on these images, see things much larger. And then this is different instars of the caterpillar. This shows how they make a cell and live inside, and that's another big cell in which there's a pupating larva which completely changes color, and then that's the same caterpillar in close-up. It's hanging there for pupation. This is the pupa, and that's the pupal